the 2020 hurricane season smashed records from start to finish.
Thankful for everything that you have, God. Everything.
2020 also saw humanity weathering the wrath of Mother Nature.
6 weeks ago, we stood on this exact balcony. Tonight, it's Delta.
The fires eating this land
have turned the skies a bright amber.
Siberia has been sizzling in record heat recently. The strongest evidence yet that human-caused climate change.
But things are not getting easier this year either.
Australia's east coast has been lashed by life-threatening flash floods.
Severe storms striking the states.
A massive dust storm hit Mongolia, China.
We're talking about record-breaking cold temperatures.
Time is not on our side, but is there a silver lining? Humanity at a crossroad in climate change. What actions can we expect from China, the United States, and the European Union? Join us for our special series, Climate Talk.
Welcome to our special program, Global Climate Talk, live stream on CGTN's digital media platforms. I'm Guan Xin in Beijing. The year of 2021 is full of climate ambitions. 40 world leaders joined the Global Summit on Climate on Thursday, and they elaborated their plans to fight climate change, and some made new ambitious targets. To talk more about that, joining me now is distinguished guests from around the world, Professor Nicolas Stern from LSE and chairman of Grantham Research Institute of Climate Change and Environment, and author of the Stern Review, one of the founding research on the economics of climate change. And Lord Barker, former UK Minister for Energy and Climate Change, now executive chairman of EM Plus Group, the world's largest producer of low-carbon aluminum. And of course, Dr. Peng Wensheng joining me from Beijing, and he's the chief economist of China International Capital Corporation, a renowned economist in China. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So let me start with you, Professor Stern, because you've been closely watching the impact of climate change and having published a report as early as 2006. What is your take on the comment of U.S. President Biden on the summit that this is a decisive decade to tackle climate change?
Professor Biden is right on that. That's a view which most of us who look at climate change would share. We have to cut emissions by around or close to a half for the 1.5 degrees centigrade target in this decade. From 2020 to 2030, we have to cut them by close to a third or 2 degrees. So that shows the magnitude of the change we need to make in this decade. We also have to think that if we fail to act in this decade, we would lock in dirty, polluting infrastructure, high carbon infrastructure, which would stay with us for a long time. So it's crucial both in terms of the magnitude and in terms of avoiding the lock-in that delay would make to high carbon infrastructure and activities. But having said that, I think the targets which many people brought to the summit in this last day or so have been good. The US said that they would cut emissions by a half by 2030 relative to 2005. The UK has committed to cutting emissions by 78% by 2035 relative to 1990. These are roughly on the right track, although they could be a little more. China has indicated that it would be phasing out coal during the 15th five-year plan and controlling it during the 14th. If China peaks, by following a strategy like that, if China peaks its emissions during the 14th plan by 2025, that would be a great step forward. China's committed to peaking before 2030, but I took the language that China brought on coal to suggest that it could peak by 2025. That would be really very good for the world and for China.
And it's good to see major countries are put some very ambitious targets at the summit. And Lord Barker, Professor Stern just mentioned that the UK's new commitment of cutting emissions by 78% on 1990 levels. What do you think about the target, and do you think the government will match it with decisive action?
I think this is terrific news, actually. The UK government holds the presidency of the climate talks this year, COP26. So to show that sort of leadership is incredibly welcome in setting the stage for this meeting in Glasgow in the United Kingdom this coming November. 78% reduction by 2035. This is a very stretching target by any accounts. I was involved in setting the UK Climate Change Act, which was the first legally binding commitment of its type of any government, any parliament of any major economy in the world, way back in 2008. And then we set a target of an 80% reduction by 2050. And I remember at the time, people thought that this was incredulous and really didn't think that this would be achievable. But if you see the progress that we've made in the UK since then, at a time when we have seen strong economic growth, but at the same time being able to decouple growth from the growth in emissions, exactly as Lord Stern said was possible, but not everyone believed. Lord Stern showed that really ahead of time what could be possible, and we've gone on to prove that it is possible. But what is going to be really challenging is getting to 100% reduction, getting to net zero by 2050. And the easier part of the decarbonisation process is the switch from coal to clean energy, particularly now. China was a real pioneer of clean energy technology. And thanks to the massive investment that there's been in China for nearly 2 decades now, the cost and the efficiency of many clean energy technologies has improved so much that now it's highly cost effective to make that switch from high carbon to clean energy. And I think that's what's underpinning the confidence of so many countries now coming forward with more ambitious plans. But to get to 100% reduction, which is what the UK has pledged to do, to get to net zero by 2050, there are a lot of different levers there. So I think by going to 78% by 2035, I think what Prime Minister Boris Johnson is actually doing is buying more time and putting more focus on those really hard final reductions, that last 20%, which will be very challenging indeed.
Well, both of you talked about China. Indeed, China is critical in this global effort to tackle climate change. And Dr. Peng, the CICC just published a very forward-thinking, comprehensive report on China's drive towards carbon neutrality. So tell us about this report and China's pathway to carbon neutrality in the next 4 decades.
Sure. This report is a systematic approach to analyze what is the pathway going forward for China to attain net zero emission and the associated economic and social impact. I think for China, the situation is somewhat different from UK, Europe, or US. We have to reach the emission peak yet. And the official target is to reach that emission peak by 2030. Now, our report estimates that, or project that the emission peak will be around 10.8 billion tons a year. And that compares about 10 billion at the current level. So the space for the increase in emission from now to the peak in the next 10 years actually is quite limited. So we have a quite big challenge over the next 10 years. And then from 2030 to 2060, from the peak to net zero, there will also be a big challenge because China has only 30 years from the peak to net zero. Whereas For example, EU has 70 years, US has 40 to 50 years. So this is going to be a huge challenge, and this in part also reflects the difference in the development stage of China. So our per capita GDP, for example, is only 1/6 of that for European Union and 1/6 of the US level. So we need to strike a balance between the need for economic development, the need for improve our living standard, and to pursue environmentally friendly development strategy. So the challenge is huge. Now, how can we get there? I think we need a systematic approach that involves mainly 3 areas. One is we need to reduce the cost of clean energy, green energy. And that will require fundamentally technological innovation and progress. So we need to promote public investment as well as private sector investment. And foremost, that will involve, in the main part, the electrification of the economic activities, and then a shift from fossil fuel to renewables in the electricity generation. So that's the first area. The second area is to increase the cost of the use of fossil fuel in the form of, for example, a carbon tax and a cap and trading system that is, already operating in some regions in China. And we expect that the first nationwide carbon trading system will be launched in June in China. And initially that will cover about 2,000 electricity generating companies. And later it is likely to be expanded to cover other sectors. And there has been a lot of discussions on that. And the general expectation is that this trading platform is likely to become the largest in the world in the carbon trading platform. So that's the second area. The third area, we need a broader economic and social changes that involves public policy as well as social governance. For example, we need more environmental friendly infrastructure. We need greater degree of digitization that will help to promote more efficient use of energy. So this involves economic as well as social changes in the process. So it's going to be a huge challenge. Yes.
Indeed, China is taking an all-round approach to reach carbon neutrality, and fighting climate change is a global endeavor. And Professor Stern, behind the green agenda, there are colossal financial investments which many poor countries cannot even imagine, besides the major economies that we just talked about. So in your opinion, have we done enough to help these poor countries to make investment in green technology and low carbon economy?
The short answer is not yet. The investments they need to make are strong. Probably we have to increase investment around the world by 2 or 3 percentage points of GDP, a little more in some countries, a little less in others. But those are very good investments. They are not the costs of going green, because those investments reduce your costs of production down the track. Often they're in activities which are already cheaper, like much of renewable electricity than fossil fuel equivalents. But they have tremendous returns in terms of cities where you can move and breathe and be productive, so people are much healthier. So these investments that we need to make as a world, in every country of the world, they are strong, powerful investments, but they do have to be made. So the challenge then is to find a way of helping the poorer countries of the world to increase that investment. Now, some part of it will be sharing technologies. Some part of it will be sharing experience. But also we have to help mobilize the world's finance so that it can work to help. I think that strong policies in the developing world would lead to them becoming still more attractive as investment destinations for private capital around the world. But we will also need the international financial institutions to act strongly, and that means that they are able to help take the early stage risk, for example, in infrastructure. And that will need the support of the richer countries to the international financial institutions to help them provide those financial flows to those very good investments that drive forward both living standards and the environment. That means that the richer countries, particularly the G7 countries, but also actually China. China is no longer in the very poor country. China does bring a lot of finance to the world. It's very good that China brings a lot of finance to the world. That means that working together, China, the G7, the richer countries must see what they can do to help increase those financial flows. And I've tried to describe the kinds of things that they can do to do exactly that.
Indeed. And Lord Barker, the UK is playing a critical role this year as the president of the COP26 in November you mentioned earlier. Do you think agreement is likely to be reached at Glasgow, and what might be included?
Well, it's always difficult to predict COP outcomes, even sometimes during the COP itself, having been present at several. But I am optimistic, and I think the constructive engagement from countries right the way around the world, despite their different geopolitical outlooks, at President Biden's Earth Day summit, and it's very encouraging to see that even though there are different worldviews from different parts of the globe, the one thing that really does seem to be uniting world leaders is the need to tackle climate change and to do that effectively and to face up to their respective responsibilities. So I am optimistic, but there is clearly a lot of work that needs to be done if the outcome from Glasgow is to have a really meaningful impact rather than just be a well-wishing communique. So it is important that every country turns up with specifics, not just the right pledges, but also at this summit we actually need to see the detail of the individual national plans that they're going to come with and that they make those commitments. Now, I think, as we said earlier, that the UK has got off to a great start by making this commitment. So that's leadership. Now we need other economies to follow and the wealthier nations to also do more to facilitate the finance that Professor Stern was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, finance is indeed a very important factor in this global fight against climate change. And Dr. Peng, China called for a Green Belt and Road initiative. Help us understand how China is going to promote green investment under the BRI.
Well, first of all, the BRI countries, they themselves have taken measures to promote the so-called green recovery, in the post-pandemic period. For example, recently, according to a report in the Financial Times, the Pakistan government has an ambitious plan that by 2025, 50% of their energy will come from renewables. So that's a very ambitious plan, and they have on themselves have an increasing share of investment in the green-related areas. And China can play an important role in this. And indeed, in recent years, China has provided more green-related financial support in the BRI countries. And going forward, we believe that the level, the share of the green-related finance in the total investment from China to BRI countries that share in last year was near 60%. And we expect that share will continue to increase going forward. So, and the second aspect is that there is a natural win-win situation to happen. That is, China is a major producer of green energy equipment. Right? So we can imagine a situation where China provides finance to BRI countries and helps them to buy this equipment produced in China. So this is a kind of balanced fund flows that is on itself sustainable over time. And thirdly, it is also important to involve other parties in this process. For example, Chinese entities can collaborate with multilateral institutions as well as lenders in the Western countries to develop so-called blended finance initiatives that will help to promote green area-related investment in BRI countries. And that will also help this global objective of reaching net zero emissions over time.
And I'd like to talk a little more about the green recovery document just mentioned with Professor Stern, because your research is considered one of the most influential in discussing the real economic implications of climate. And in your opinion, how has the COVID-19 affected the economics of climate? And do you think a green recovery is likely, and how? Because I'm glad that people are having low carbon meetings recent days like us due to the COVID-19.
The COVID crisis has been a tragedy for the world, and it's put great pressure on investment and finance, in addition, of course, to the human tragedy of the disease and the deaths. To come out of this, we're going to have to invest strongly. To tackle the climate crisis, we're going to have to invest strongly. So in terms of the economy, the way forward for recovering from COVID and the way forward for climate are very much the same. Strong, clean, innovative, sustainable investment. So that's the challenge. There's no doubt that COVID has made life more difficult, but we see that what we have to do to come out of COVID and what we have to do to tackle the climate crisis is similar. We have seen some positive things in terms of our ability to change very quickly. We now know that if we recognize a crisis, we can act quickly. We have, of course, this kind of meeting, which you just described. That's another plus, which will reduce emissions. And we have, I think, around the world, a desire to build back better, a recognition that we were in a fragile state, that we had economies which were not robust, many of them which were suffering problems in social cohesion, many of them destroying their own and the world's biodiversity. So I think from this, there is a desire to build back better. But we have to recognize that coming out of COVID, we have to do things differently. Coming out of COVID, we have to not simply restore what we were doing, we have to change what we were doing if we are to manage the exit from COVID well, and if we're at the same time to go on to a different path. So we have to overcome the difficulties and we have to take the positive lessons.
Well, talking about change, Dr. Peng, how will China's carbon neutrality target affect the country's growth model in the future?
The Chinese government has pursued the so-called high-quality development strategy in recent years. And what is the high-quality development strategy? What do we mean by high quality? I think that foremost it means sustainable growth. Right? And that requires balancing between economic development and environment and society. And it also means we will become less dependent on factory imports and more dependent on innovations as the driving force for economic growth. In recent years, we have seen significant increase in R&D spending as a share of GDP, and last year it accounted for around 2.5%, and we expect that it will continue to increase in the years ahead. And secondly, we should remember that when we talk about green energy, it is mainly about manufacturing. And China is the largest manufacturing economy in the world. So naturally, we have this advantage of the so-called economy of scale. As the scale increase, the average cost, unit cost declines. So that applies particularly in China's case. So in a way, I believe it gives some new competitive advantage to China's economy in the global setting. And for example, I would imagine that in 10 years or 20 years' time, China could become a significant energy exporter, a green energy exporter, or to be specific, a significant exporter of green energy equipment, right? Rather than currently a net importer of oil, for example. So that, in my view, will also have profound implications for the structure of our economy and for the global economic landscape. Thirdly, we will have some major structural changes in the economy in China, and particularly in the northern part of the country. Some provinces, currently they heavily rely on fossil fuel as a source of income, a source of economic growth. So they will have to go through some difficult period of structural changes and transformation. So this is a challenge for the private sector as well as the public sector. Okay. And fiscal policy, structural policy will have to play an important role in dealing with this.
Okay, we don't have much time left. Lord Barker, you know Chinese economy very well. EM Plus just announced a partnership with a Chinese producer, which could fit into China's drive towards carbon neutrality. So what do you think about China's green agenda and the potential for more industrial cooperation?
I think there's huge potential. Certainly the group that I lead, the N Plus group, as you said, we're the world's largest producer of low-carbon aluminium. And the future for manufactured products is to use low-carbon materials. Nick's mentioned build back better, but it's really important that everyone buy back better. There's going to be this huge surge in infrastructure spending over the next decade. Well, it's really important that the materials that are put to use in building the green infrastructure are themselves sustainable. So it's very important that a metal like aluminium, which is so important not just for infrastructure, but for things like electric vehicles, where China has so much to offer, for consumer products like this aluminium can here, that actually you are using a metal that is low carbon. And there China does need to make the switch largely from coal to renewables, and not just switch your energy source, but also, as we are doing, invest in innovation. At the N Plus Group, we are announced this year not just that we were becoming the first global group to adopt a net zero strategy in our sector, but also new technology that we are now commercializing of inert anodes that allows us to produce aluminium with just 0.01% carbon per ton of aluminium. Really record-beating stuff. And we need more of that type of innovation right the way across manufacturing and the whole supply chain. And so Dr. Peng's absolutely right. We need that combination of investment in technologies and innovation so that the whole global economy can decarbonize together. And no economy, manufacturing economy, is more important than China.
That's right. Well, we hope we can also consume better and live better. Hope with all those concerted efforts, this year will kick off a decade of a better future for all human beings. Well, thank you so much for your insights, Professor Lord Stern, Lord Barker, and Dr. Peng Wensheng for us. And that's our special program of Global Climate Talk on CGTN. Thanks for being with us. I'm Guan Xin in Beijing. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you.